When we think of Japan today, this is what we usually think of. 4 incredibly mountainous main islands called Hokkaido, Honshu, Shikoku, and Kyushu that come together and form what the Japanese themselves call Nihon, or the land of the rising sun. Long before Japan was a unified country that stretched across these 4 islands, it was a place divided by different tribes and clans who all competed for power and control over these lands. Over the course of more than 1,000 years, the samurai, Japan's famous warriors, became instrumental not just in war, but in shaping their country culturally and politically. Many fantastic tales exist about these warriors, from their heroic peak to the tragic downfall of the last samurai. But where did it all start? Who were the first samurai? Today, we will take a closer look at Japan's very early history, the emergence of the samurai, and their eventual rise to power through countless wars and rebellions. These are the origins and the early history of the samurai. Considering how important the samurai have been to the evolution of Japan, it's only right that we start their story with the early history of Japan itself. There are many different versions of how Japan was first inhabited. According to Japanese legends, the 7,000 islands that the country now calls its home were created by the male deity Izanagi, who thrusted a jewel-encrusted spear into the ocean. When Izanagi pulled the spear out of the water, the droplets that fell back into the water created the Japanese islands, which Izanagi and his female counterpart Izanami then inhabited. One of their many offspring, Amaterasu, the sun goddess, is actually considered by the legends to be the ancestor of the Japanese imperial family. As cool as this tale might be, Japan's first inhabitants probably came from multiple waves of colonization originating from the Asian mainland. The so-called Chomon people are widely considered to be some of the first colonists on the Japanese islands. Another wave of settlers then came in from Korea, settling along the eastern end of an inland sea between 3 of Japan's 4 main islands, bringing with them useful techniques like rice cultivation. This region came to be known as the Kansai region and contained many of Japan's early capital cities, namely Asuka, Nara, and of course Kyoto, which remained as the capital of Japan for most of the country's history. The Kansai Plain and the inland sea slowly but surely became the center of Japanese civilization over time and were also home to the powerful and historically significant Yamato clan, which is said to have existed from around the 3rd all the way up to the 8th century. All of Japanese history that took place before the 7th century and before the samurai became a thing is a bit of a blur though, apart from a few Chinese chronicles that mention Japan from time to time. Much of this early history seemed to have been lost thanks to one specific incident. When Crown Prince and future Emperor Tenji murdered one of his mother's imperial advisors, the victim's father lit his own mansion on fire, perishing in the flames and taking with him a few culturally significant treasures. Among these treasures was an incredibly valuable chronicle that apparently recorded much of Japanese history leading up to this event. This chronicle might have been able to serve an important role in clearing up a few mysteries, including Japan's relationship to Korea at the time. It is, however, speculated that the rulers of Japan and Southern Korea might have actually been related in a way. Archaeological discoveries like ceremonial swords given to the Japanese by the Koreans as gifts might, in a way, confirm this rumor. This supposed friendship between Korea and Japan was put to the test in 654, when the ruler of Tang Dynasty China ordered the Japanese to attack a Korean nation by the name of Baekje. China, of course, already had a huge influence on early Japanese history. Around the 4th century, for example, Japan received its first writing system from China, which is still in use today, under the name kanji, or literally Chinese characters. For China, Japan was viewed as something similar to a vassal state, and an attack on Korea would prove the loyalty of the Japanese to the Chinese. The Japanese Emperor Kotoku made a decision and prepared his army. However, his army did not prepare for an attack. Instead, they prepared to defend Japan. because the Chinese emperor would soon find out that Kotoku had ignored his orders. China then joined forces with another Korean kingdom called Shilla and wiped out Baekje, but not before Baekje was able to send a request for help to Japan, a request that was met with a huge military response by the Japanese. What they didn't know at the time was that this was about to be the worst defeat of Japan's pre-modern history, with losses estimated to be at least 10,000 men, a Korean chronicler wrote. In this action, they burned 400 of the Japanese vessels. The flames and smoke rose to scorch the heavens, while the ocean's waters turned as red as cinnabar. Following this heavy defeat, the Japanese were sure that a counterattack by the Chinese forces would come soon, and Emperor Tenji, who had taken the throne in Japan by now, was obsessed with making the necessary preparations, should such an attack come his way. He moved the capital from Asuka to Omi, which was protected by mountains on 3 sides and a lake on the other. And it was now also common for members of the royal court to carry swords. Tenji was also responsible for multiple government reforms, meant to imitate the Chinese model. Among these reforms was the formation of a ministry of bureaucrats, or civil servants, which was divided into 12 ranks. It is here that we get our first actual mention of the word samurai, used to describe the 6th lowest of the ministry's 12 ranks. However, this word was not synonymous with a warrior, like it is today. The original meaning behind the word samurai is actually servant. It wasn't until the reign of Emperor Tenmu, Tenji's brother, that the samurai that we now know finally started to take shape. The samurai transforming under the leadership of a guy like Emperor Tenmu makes total sense, once you get to know the guy. Tenmu, from the moment he was born, was constantly exposed to war and power struggles. As a teenager, he witnessed his own brother, former Emperor Tenji, take the throne by force. As a young adult, he helped prepare the fleet that fought and lost against the Chinese army in the battle for Baekje. In his 30s, he was part of a nationwide preparation for a Chinese counterattack that, by the way, never came. Tenmu knew nothing but war and the military, as proven by a quote from the man himself. In government, military matters are the essential thing. All civil and military officials should therefore diligently practice the use of arms and riding on horseback. Be careful to provide an adequate supply of horses, weapons, and articles of personal costume. Those who have horses shall be made mounted soldiers. Those who have none shall be foot soldiers. Both shall receive training. At age 42, Tenmu finally ascended the throne, which he managed to do only by waging war against his own nephew, the intended heir to the throne. With such passion for his country's military and multiple decades to think about what to do with it, it's no surprise that his reign led to multiple changes and reforms inside the Japanese military. Privately owned heavy military equipment like crossbows, catapults, and the likes were confiscated by the government and put into a vault. Soldiers were now enlisted from peasant families, with 1 soldier on average provided per household. The rank of a soldier within the military largely depended on their background and wealth. Sons of powerful men were able to work as guards in the capital, while those wealthy enough to afford a horse could join the highly respected cavalry. The poorer conscripts, however, had to stick with the not-so-fancy job as a border guard or working the signal fires along the inland sea. With the threat from China fading more and more as time went on, the Japanese government had to give its military other things to do. A slow expansion into the eastern parts of Japan had been in the works since the 3rd century, the early days of the Yamato clan. By 774, the Kanto region, where modern-day Tokyo is located, had been discovered and had become hugely important for the Japanese people. While the capital was always somewhere in the western region of Kansai, it was actually the Kanto region that produced more rice and provided more men to the military at the time. With the southwestern parts of Japan at peace, it was also the east and the north that received a lot more attention from the military. From 774 until 812, the 38 Years' War saw Yamato control Japan take on the Emishi, the aforementioned descendants of Japan's first inhabitants. This war turned out to be quite important to the Japanese soldiers' slow evolution into what we now think of as samurai. Not only did these warriors gain new skills and experience from fighting against, and sometimes even alongside the Emishi, veteran soldiers returned to their homes with stories about the war, as well as Emishi tactics and weaponry. It was at this point that the straight swords used by the Japanese up until then slowly started to be replaced with curved blades, resembling the famous katana swords of the samurai a lot more than their predecessors. It's important to note that while warriors did carry a sword, mounted archery was considered to have a much more important role in battle for a very long time, which was symbolized by the changes that the warrior's armor went through during the 38 Years' War. Use of iron plates was significantly reduced, with hardened leather taking over as the preferred material. The helmet was the toughest point of the whole armor, which was supposed to protect from arrows fired from above. With archers unable to use shields while firing arrows, square pads were attached to the shoulder parts of the armor, creating a little bit of that boxy, angular look that we nowadays connect to the style of the samurai. The Emishi put up a good fight against the Yamato Japanese armies, but eventually lost the war after some of their own tribes turned against each other. The war against the Emishi officially ended in the year 812. By then, the capital had been moved to a place where it would remain for over 1,000 years, with only one short interruption in 1180. The new capital came to be known as Heian-kyo and would later receive the name Kyoto. The defeated Emishi were now integrated into the existing societal structure of the rest of Japan. This included a newly created militia of capital guards, an estimated 10,000 of which are thought to have been descendants of wealthy Emishi. The Yamato Japanese thought that by integrating Emishi into their society, they would be able to teach what they still considered to be barbarians the manners and culture of the more civilized Japanese. However, it actually turned out to be a cultural exchange on both sides. More than ever, the future generation of Japanese soldiers took inspiration from the tried and tested techniques and technologies of the Emishi, further contributing to the shaping of early Japanese society. Warriors were also tasked with keeping peace in the provinces outside the capital city, including the Kanto region. The residents of Heian-kyo, however, considered these warriors to be uneducated and uncultured in comparison to the ones found in the capital. The language used at the time reflects this, calling warriors either Togoku no Musha, warriors of the eastern lands, or Miyako no Musha, warriors of the capital. Some chose to not even refer to those in the provinces as warriors at all, instead using the word samurai, which at the time still meant servant. The capital was now also the home of Emperor Saga, a man that fathered at least 50 children. Yes, you heard that right. At least 50 children, long before Viagra became a thing. Raising 50 kids is expensive as is, but raising 50 children of an imperial family was too much of a burden on the family's finances, even for the emperor. Saga's solution to the problem was simple. 32 of his children were told that they were no longer a part of the imperial family. Instead, they would receive their own clans, under the names Taira and Minamoto. These two clans were pushed out of the capital and into the provinces, bringing Japanese royalty closer to the common folk than ever before. While it's safe to assume that none of these children of the emperor had to leave the capital empty-handed, their names alone were the closest thing to a financial safety net that they could hope for. Members of the Taira and Minamoto clans who somehow accumulated a debt simply paid it off by trading their names, with other clans in Japan's provinces gladly giving up their name in order to become part of a family of nobles. In terms of improving imperial finances, the plan of creating these two clans and sending them to the provinces worked like a charm, that's for sure. What Emperor Saga didn't know was that his actions would kick off a series of events that would lead to multiple centuries of infighting, intrigues, and wars that would significantly shape the future of the land of the rising sun. We jump forward to the year 931, more than a century after the Taira and Minamoto clans came into existence. One descendant of the Taira clan, a man by the name Taira Masakado, would soon be the first samurai from the provinces to lead an uprising against Japan's government and its emperor. Since we're talking about events from more than 1,000 years ago, it's difficult to pin down a definite event that triggered said uprising. One theory is that it all started when Masakado was about to marry his cousin against the wishes of her father, Taira Yoshikane. Not because they saw anything wrong with cousins getting married back then, but because Yoshikane considered himself to be superior to Masakado and wished for a better suited son-in-law. For him, the whole thing was about his own reputation, above all else. A heated argument ensued, which started involving different clans as well, including the Minamoto clan, which was the second clan that branched off from the imperial family 1 century earlier. Arguments soon turned into actual violence on the battlefield. First, Masakado fought Yoshikane's brother-in-law, a member of the Minamoto clan. A battle between uncle and nephew followed soon after. Masakado was able to emerge victorious from both fights, but got in trouble with the government for the first time when they found out that he had burned down around 500 houses during one of the battles. He was only pardoned thanks to personal connections with a member of the Fujiwara clan, which through marriage with members of the imperial family and a few other trickeries had been able to control the government from behind the scenes since the 9th century. Yoshikane, who was still incredibly salty over his recent defeat, wanted a rematch against his nephew and got what he asked for. While confrontations between Yoshikane's and Masakado's armies continued even after Yoshikane's death in 939, Masakado started behaving like he was the emperor of the Kanto region that he called home. He got involved in local disputes that actually had nothing to do with him, which naturally pissed off more than a few clan leaders and wealthy residents of the area. The capital received multiple reports about Masakado's activities in the Kanto area, but warnings issued by the government were simply ignored by the man who saw himself as the real emperor, the emperor of the Kanto region. Masakado considered Japan's east to be wealthier, more important, and more powerful than the Kansai region in the west, where the capital and the government was located. To him, Kanto was its own nation, independent from the court that in many ways was disconnected with what was actually going on in their country. Many residents of the Kanto region agreed with his opinions, gaining Masakado legend status even after his death, which only came when the government finally sent their own army after him in the year 940. His head, which was taken and brought to the capital, is actually part of a few creepy folk tales. A place in Tokyo that you can still visit today, called Kubisuka, is rumored to be the home of a curse related to Masakado, the man that over the years started to be described as the first samurai. The end of Masakado and his post-mortem legacy also led to the birth of the so-called Gunkimono, tales of war which are told mostly with entertainment in mind. Even so, they offer some interesting insights into certain customs on the battlefield that started around this time, including the announcement of one's own name and lineage before charging into battle. Samurai armor also went through a few changes. It was now seen as important to stand out and differentiate oneself from the other soldiers on the battlefield. Not only because these soldiers had a huge ego, but also because it made it a lot easier to spot those who surrendered or ran away. For the samurai, surrender was not an option. In order to stand out, colorful silk replaced the boring old leather straps used up until this point, while elaborate and distinctive headpieces also became quite popular among warriors. While Masakado might not have been able to make a dent in the existing political structures and hierarchies, his resistance to the capital would greatly influence the samurai that followed in his footsteps. The following centuries saw multiple disputes and battles among warlords of the east and even an uprising by the Emishi that still resided in the north of Japan in the year 1050. But while all of these confrontations and uprisings took place far away from the government, the violence would find its way directly into the capital when the Hogen and Heiji rebellions of 1156 and 1159 kickstarted a monumental shift in Japanese politics. In 1123, Emperor Toba, the 74th Emperor of Japan, officially resigned from his position, but would go on to pull the strings from a monastery that he now resided in. When he passed away in 1156, a dispute over succession to the throne and control over the powerful Fujiwara clan broke out. The two emperors competing for the throne were the now reigning Emperor Go Shirakawa and the retired Emperor Sutoku. Each of them received support from different members of the Fujiwara clan and two other clans that might seem familiar, the Taira and the Minamoto. The dispute, as expected, was taken to the battlefield. This time, however, the battlefield was not far away from the capital, somewhere in the provinces. This civil war was to take place inside the capital, on the streets of Kyoto. It would also be a dramatic showcase of violent infighting between parents and their children and among brothers, with members of the Fujiwara, Taira, and Minamoto clans fighting for both sides of the battle, which came to be known as the Hogen Rebellion. On the morning of July 11th, 1156, supporters of the retired Emperor Sutoku attacked the reigning emperor's compound with the help of around 600 horsemen, which saw them outnumbered 3-1 by the defending party. The most detailed account of what happened during the Hogen Rebellion might come from a story titled Hogen Monogatari. One standout character of this story was Minamoto Tametomo, who apparently fought so bravely against the attackers that he almost single-handedly managed to push them back. The attackers, both outnumbered and outclassed by the defenders, decided to light the enemy's palace on fire as a last resort, allowing them to retreat into safety. The defenders and reigning emperor Go Shirakawa emerged victorious from the Hogen Rebellion and managed to eventually chase down their enemies. Retired Emperor Sutoku was sent into exile, while multiple members of the defeated side of both the Taira and Minamoto clans were executed. On a quick side note, the Hogen Monogatari also contains the first reference to seppuku, also known as harakiri, a custom that involves the cutting of one's own belly that would become synonymous with both the samurai and other parts of Japanese society over the following centuries. Considering all the awful things that could potentially happen to a captured samurai, the rising popularity of harakiri becomes kind of relatable. It was incredibly painful, sure, but when compared to some torture techniques of the time period, it becomes quite an attractive option. Following the Hogen Rebellion, the Taira clan was able to gain huge amounts of influence and power in the capital. Their reign at the top was interrupted only shortly by a second rebellion known as the Heiji Rebellion, which saw the leader of the Minamoto clan again attempting to kidnap the former emperor Go Shirakawa, this time successfully so. However, the Minamoto were absolutely unprepared to actually keep Kyoto for themselves, and were soon defeated yet again by the Taira clan, who then seized the Minamoto clan's wealth and land as punishment. With the Minamotos close to extinction and no one around to stop the mighty Taira clan, the stage was set for a samurai to truly rise to the top of Japanese politics for the first time. Taira Kiyomori was the first samurai to receive a senior rank at court. Then, in 1171, he managed to marry his daughter to the reigning emperor Takakura, with the child that resulted from this marriage enthroned as the Emperor of Japan as a young child. Kiyomori served as the emperor's advisor and was now the de facto ruler of Japan. Soon, he was able to put his power and influence into action when he reportedly arrived in Kyoto accompanied by several thousand samurai warriors and replaced more than 40 government officials with his own supporters. At this point, Kiyomori and the Taira clan should have been unstoppable, but he made one fatal mistake following the Heiji Rebellion. He decided to exile Minamoto Yoritomo, the son of the rebellion's leader, instead of executing him. Now, a few years after the rebellion and the death of his father, Yoritomo was back with a vengeance. Not only was he motivated to avenge his father, he also had the support of the whole Kanto region. Pretty much every clan in the east of Japan was willing to fight under a Minamoto banner if it meant that Kiyomori, considered a villain by many outside of the capital, would lose control over the government. Yoritomo and the Minamoto clan also had the support of someone close to the imperial court, Prince Mochihito, a potential candidate for the title of emperor whose chance to take the imperial throne was taken away by Kiyomori and his hunger for power and influence. The Minamoto army was now heading west to confront the imperial army of the Taira clan, outnumbering them 10-1. As the Minamoto army was drawing ever closer to the capital, Taira clan leader Kiyomori was suffering through a serious fever and eventually passed away in 1181, before a real battle ever took place. His infamous last words being, "My sole regret is that I have yet to see the severed head of Yoritomo. After my death, build no temples or pagodas to my memory. Chant no sutras for my soul. Bring me the head of Yoritomo and set it before my tomb. That need be your sole devotion." The war came into full swing in 1183 and would go on to be one of the bloodiest and most devastating wars ever fought on Japanese soil. It was truly difficult to be Japanese at this point in time, with not only a violent civil war looming on the horizon, but multiple natural disasters and a famine also threatening the lives of the population. The Genpei Wars, as they were called, featured countless legendary battles that have been retold ad nauseum over the following centuries. One of the most important of these battles was the Battle of Kurikara, where a cousin of Yoritomo was able to defeat a much stronger Taira army consisting of over 40,000 men, which he did by chasing large parts of the Taira army off a cliff with the help of oxen that had torches attached to their horns. Yes, that is apparently how it actually happened. The victory at Kurikara allowed Yoritomo's cousin, and with him the Minamoto clan, to march into Kyoto and take over the capital. Remaining members of the Taira clan fled the capital and eventually ended up retreating to Shimonoseki, gambling on their skills in naval battle in order to survive. However, the final battle of the Genpei Wars would soon follow, in April of 1185. The Battle of Dan-no-ura saw the death of the young Emperor Antoku and the Taira clan leaders. While the Minamoto clan was victorious, the Taira clan never regained its old power and influence. It was also the Minamoto clan, more specifically Yoritomo, that initiated a new era for Japan. He set up the new base of the Minamoto clan in the coastal town of Kamakura and started revamping Japan's political structure. The emperor would stay, but become a figurehead, more than an actual leader. Each province was now administered by the so-called shugo, while the chito were responsible for things like taxes and management of estates. Both were basically feudal lords who served under Yoritomo, who gave himself the title Seitai Shogun, or Shogun for short. The new Kamakura shogunate, which ruled over Japan, was made official in 1192. Marking the beginning of the Kamakura period of Japan, which lasted until the year 1333. The shogunate system itself would follow Japan for much longer than that. It took until 1868 for the shoguns of Japan to once again be replaced by an emperor as the true ruler of Japan. That emperor was of course the legendary Emperor Meiji, whose Meiji restoration brought Japan out of a centuries-long isolation and into the 20th century. The samurai are now synonymous with Japan itself for good reason. For more than 700 years, they controlled Japan not just politically, they also greatly influenced things like social hierarchies and even art. It's hard to imagine what Japan would look like these days if the samurai never rose to power. At the very least though, we'd be missing out on some pretty damn good movies. Are there any samurai topics or stories that you would like me to cover in the future? Let me know in the comments. If you're looking for my sources, I will put those in the description box below, like always. Also, don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe if you haven't already. Either way, thank you so much for watching. Sayonara.